There is a moment in every person's life when something quietly breaks inside them. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way the world can see. It breaks softly, silently, in a way only they can feel. It happens when they realize that the life they're living is not anywhere close to the life they once imagined. And that moment can come at 20, at 30, at 40, at 60. It doesn't care about age, it only cares about awareness. Some people ignore that awareness. They bury it under routines, responsibilities, distractions, and noise. Others can feel it like a pulse beneath their skin, quietly whispering that something has to change. The truth is simple. Your life does not transform when you find the right opportunity or the right timing or the right motivation. It transforms the moment you stop doing the things that are silently destroying you, the things you've normalized, the things you tell yourself are harmless, the things that feel comfortable but cost you everything. And most people keep doing them for years without realizing they are trading their future for a temporary sense of ease. I want to tell you the story of a man who lived like this for far too long. Because in his story, you will see pieces of yourself. Not because you are failing, not because you are weak, but because you are human. For years, this man believed that success belonged to other people. He admired them, envied them, studied them, but he never believed he could become one of them. Every morning he woke up tired, not from lack of sleep, but from lack of purpose. His mind was heavy before the day even started. He would scroll through his phone before getting out of bed, filling his brain with the lives of strangers before he'd even touched his own. He didn't understand it then, but that was the first habit destroying him. Not the scrolling, not the phone, but the unconscious belief that other people's lives were more interesting than his own, that other people were building something while he was wasting time, that other people had meaning while he had routines. His day would slip away just like that, not in dramatic moments, but in tiny ones. Moments that looked harmless but accumulated into a life he didn't want. He went to a job that drained him but paid just enough to keep him from leaving. He surrounded himself with people who talked constantly but never said anything that mattered. He carried dreams he refused to claim because claiming them meant risking failure. He lived inside the same week repeated over and over again. Nothing truly changed, nothing truly broke, but nothing truly grew either. And the most dangerous life is not the one filled with pain, it is the one filled with nothing. One evening, years into this cycle, something strange happened. He didn't experience a breakdown. He didn't cry or collapse or scream. He simply stopped. He sat on the edge of his bed in the quiet darkness of his room and felt a heaviness he could no longer ignore. Not sadness, not fear, just the weight of knowing he was disappointing himself. That realization hit harder than any failure he had ever experienced. It was a still moment, but it was sharp. It cut through the noise he had been drowning in for years. And for the first time, he spoke the truth he'd been avoiding all along. He whispered, barely audible, "I can't keep living like this." That simple sentence carried the power of an earthquake. Not because it changed his life instantly, but because it broke the illusion he had been hiding behind. The illusion that things would magically improve someday. The illusion that he had unlimited time. The illusion that waiting was harmless. He didn't make a plan that night. He didn't write goals or create systems or promise himself a new life. He simply became aware. And awareness is the first step of transformation, the step most people skip because it is uncomfortable. Awareness forces you to confront the truth without excuses. And the truth was this: he knew exactly what was destroying him. He had known for a long time. He just wasn't ready to admit it. The next morning, he didn't feel motivated. He didn't feel inspired. He didn't feel transformed. But something subtle had shifted deep inside him. He got out of bed a little slower, but with a different intention. He walked to the bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. Really looked. Maybe for the first time, he didn't judge himself. He didn't hate what he saw. He simply recognized the truth. The man staring back was not living his life, he was enduring it. And that realization created a quiet fire inside him. Change doesn't begin with motivation. Change begins with honesty, and he was finally being honest with himself. He knew he couldn't change everything overnight, but he also knew something else. He didn't need to. His life didn't require 10 new habits. It didn't require a perfect plan. It didn't require waiting for the right time. It required stopping 3 things that had been stealing his future in silence. He didn't know what those 3 things were yet. He only knew this. If he kept living the way he had been living, he would wake up 5 years later in the exact same place, maybe even worse. And the thought of losing 5 more years lit a fear in him stronger than any comfort his routine could offer. He went to work that day, but for the first time, he was observing himself, watching his habits, watching how much of his life was lived on autopilot. It was uncomfortable, it was awkward, but it was necessary, because you cannot change what you refuse to see. And he was finally seeing it. What he discovered that day would shock him. It would shake him. It would force him to confront parts of himself he had been avoiding for years. He would soon understand why his confidence had disappeared, why his motivation had died, why his dreams felt unreachable. He would realize that everything he wanted was not blocked by lack of talent or lack of resources or lack of opportunity, but by 3 deeply rooted behaviors he had accepted as normal. And the moment he identified them, everything in his life began to shift. The man spent the next few days watching himself the way a quiet observer watches a stranger. Not judging, not blaming, simply noticing. He noticed how easily his attention slipped away. He noticed how quickly his energy drained when he started his mornings without intention. He noticed how many times he agreed to things he did not want to do, simply because he lacked the strength to say no. And slowly, the truth he had been avoiding for years began to reveal itself. The first thing he realized he had to stop was something he believed was harmless. In fact, everyone around him believed it was harmless too. It was the habit of delaying the smallest tasks simply because they felt uncomfortable. He would postpone tiny decisions, tiny actions, tiny responsibilities, and those tiny delays grew into a mountain of weight that followed him everywhere. He didn't know it then, but procrastination was not the issue. Avoidance was. Avoiding discomfort, avoiding effort, avoiding anything that demanded a version of himself he wasn't used to being. What he avoided grew stronger. What he postponed became heavier. And every time he told himself he would do it later, he weakened the relationship he had with himself. He started seeing how often he said, "I will start tomorrow," or "I will try next week," or "I will do it when I feel ready." These words had become a shield that protected him from effort but robbed him of progress. He noticed that even a task as small as sending an email or cleaning a corner of his room filled him with a strange resistance. Not because the task was hard, but because completing it meant stepping into a slightly better version of himself, and that version scared him. Most people think procrastination is laziness, but in reality, it is the fear of becoming someone new. And he finally understood this. One evening, he came home from work and saw a small pile of dishes in the sink. Previously, he would have left them there telling himself it was no big deal. But this time, he felt something different. The dishes were not the problem. The problem was what leaving them represented, so he washed them immediately. It was a tiny action, but it felt like breaking a chain. Every time he avoided a small task, he strengthened the identity of someone who could not trust himself. But every time he completed a small task immediately, he built the identity of someone who could. That was the moment he committed to stopping the first thing that had been destroying his life. He would stop delaying the small things. He would stop negotiating with his own mind. He would stop handing the future version of himself responsibilities he should handle in the present, because the truth is simple. If you cannot handle the small things, you will never handle the big ones. The second thing he realized he had to stop was harder to face. It required a depth of honesty most people never reach. He noticed how often he ran back to the same people, the same distractions, the same cycles of conversation that led nowhere. People who drained him, people who doubted him, people who lived in a mindset of limitation and called it realism, people who used jokes to hide their envy, people who discouraged ambition because ambition threatened their comfort. These were people he cared about, but they were also people who kept him anchored to the version of himself he was trying to outgrow. It felt cruel to admit it, but staying connected to people who kept him small was an act of self-betrayal. He saw how many decisions he made based on what others would think rather than what his future required. He saw how much of his energy was spent trying to be liked, trying to fit in, trying to avoid judgment. But the truth was clear. You cannot build a new life while surrounding yourself with people committed to their old one. He understood now that he had to stop giving access to everyone who wanted his time. Not because he was better than them, but because he was becoming better than the version of himself who allowed everyone to interrupt his growth. One night, while reflecting, he thought about a conversation he had had months earlier. A friend had mocked him for wanting more out of life, said he was overthinking, said he was unrealistic, said he should be grateful for what he had. At the time, he laughed it off, but now he realized that moment had planted a seed of doubt inside him, and doubt had grown silently ever since. He finally understood that not everyone in your life is meant to walk with you into your future. Some people belong only to your past. Some people are only meant to teach you who you cannot become. And the moment he accepted this, he felt a strange kind of grief mixed with relief. Letting go was painful, but staying small was worse. The third thing he realized he had to stop was the most deeply rooted of all. It was something he had carried since childhood without understanding its power. He had to stop believing that his future depended on luck, timing, or circumstances. He had spent years telling himself that things would get better when life changed, when he got a new job, when he felt more confident, when he had more time, when he had more money. But now he saw the truth. Life had never been the barrier. His mindset was. He had been living as though improvement required permission from the world, but the world was not withholding anything from him. The only thing standing between his current life and the life he wanted was the belief that he wasn't ready. And he realized something profound. Readiness is not a feeling. Readiness is a decision, a moment. A choice to move even when your hands shake, even when your heart races, even when your mind whispers fear. He knew now that the world does not reward people who wait. Somewhere in the middle of this realization, he felt something he had not felt in years. A quiet spark, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, he could build a life that made him proud. And as that spark grew, he began to understand that stopping these three destructive patterns was not about discipline. It was about identity. He was no longer trying to become a better person. He was trying to stop being the person who made choices that hurt him. He was rewriting the foundation of who he was. He was teaching himself to trust himself again. As he continued observing his thoughts and actions, he began to notice moments of strength he never acknowledged before. Moments when he wanted to give up, but didn't. Moments when he felt afraid, but moved anyway. Moments when he doubted himself yet still showed up. These moments had always been there. He had simply been too distracted to see them. For the first time in years, he felt clarity. Not the loud, dramatic clarity people talk about in movies, but a quiet clarity that felt like finally hearing your own voice after years of noise. Something inside him whispered that If he kept going, if he kept stopping the things that were dragging him down, his life would not just improve, it would transform. He was ready. Not because life changed, but because he changed. And this was only the beginning of a journey he never thought he deserved. As the days passed, the man began to feel something he had not felt in a very long time. It wasn't motivation. Motivation comes and goes like weather. This was something steadier, quieter, something that lived deeper than excitement. It was self-respect. With every small decision he made, every moment he chose action instead of avoidance, every boundary he set with people who drained him, he felt himself returning to a version of himself he thought he had lost forever. The world around him didn't suddenly applaud him or recognize his change. There were no dramatic transformations, no cinematic montages, no perfect streaks of productivity. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving instead of drifting. He felt like his days belonged to him again. And that feeling, that quiet ownership of his life, became addictive. He started waking up with intention, not with enthusiasm, not every day, but with awareness. He no longer rolled out of bed and surrendered to autopilot. He paused, he breathed. He reminded himself that today was another opportunity to strengthen the identity he was building. He noticed that when he stopped delaying the small tasks, something incredible happened. His mind felt lighter, his energy increased, his confidence grew. He realized that the weight he had been carrying for years wasn't the weight of difficulty. It was the weight of decisions he avoided. Life was never draining him, his avoidance was. And each time he refused to postpone a task, he took another ounce of weight off his shoulders. It was subtle, but powerful. He could feel his mind becoming sharper, clearer, faster. It felt like waking up from a long sleep. He also began distancing himself from people who kept him small. Not with anger or drama, but with quiet, intentional space. He stopped replying instantly. He stopped engaging in conversations that went nowhere. He stopped entertaining negativity disguised as realism. And with every boundary he created, his emotional energy returned to him. He didn't realize how exhausted he had been until he finally stopped giving pieces of himself away for free. Gradually, he found himself drawn to different kinds of people. Not perfect people, not extraordinary people, but people who were also trying, people who were building, people who spoke in possibilities instead of limitations, people whose presence made him feel hopeful instead of drained. He realized something powerful about relationships. The right people don't motivate you by force, they motivate you by existing. Being around them makes you want to rise. And as he rose, the people who once pulled him down became quieter and more distant, not because he pushed them away, but because they could no longer reach the height he was climbing toward. But the most profound change happened inside his mind. He stopped believing that success required the perfect moment. He stopped waiting for confidence before taking action. He stopped expecting life to become easier before he became better. Instead, he began embracing discomfort as part of the process. When he felt fear, he took small steps anyway. When his mind whispered excuses, he questioned them instead of obeying them. When doubt appeared, he acknowledged it but didn't let it make his decisions. He realized that the mind does not become stronger through thinking, it becomes stronger through action. And with each action he took, his belief in his future grew. He started to understand that confidence is not something you find. Confidence is something you earn. Every evening, as he reflected on his day, he noticed how differently he felt compared to the man he used to be. Instead of feeling drained from doing nothing meaningful, he felt satisfied from doing small things consistently. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the future, he felt hopeful because he finally saw evidence that he could change. Instead of feeling trapped by time, he felt grateful for each new day because he knew how to use it. He began to see that what truly destroys people is not hardship, it is drifting. It is waking up day after day without growth, without intention, without direction. And he wasn't drifting anymore. That shift alone made him feel alive again. One night, he sat on his balcony, looking out at the quiet street below. The air was still, the world felt slow, and he realized something that nearly brought him to tears. In just a short amount of time, he had transformed more than he had in the last 5 years. Not because his circumstances changed, but because he stopped waiting for them to change. He had always believed transformation required big moments, a new year, a new job, a new environment. But now he understood the truth. Big moments don't change your life. Small decisions repeated daily do. And as he sat there, he felt a deep sense of pride, a feeling he had forgotten was possible. He had kept promises to himself. He had shown up for himself. He had proven to himself that he was someone worth believing in. What he didn't know yet was that the biggest shift was still coming. The shift where momentum becomes identity. The shift where discipline becomes natural. The shift where confidence becomes effortless. The shift where he no longer has to force growth because growth becomes who he is. And that shift begins when he discovers how these three changes ripple into every part of his life, creating opportunities he once thought were impossible. His life was no longer something that happened to him. It was something he shaped, something he directed, something he finally felt worthy of owning. The changes were still subtle on the outside, invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but inside him, a quiet revolution was taking place. He felt himself becoming a person who moved with intention instead of hesitation, a person who acted even when he was afraid, a person who no longer needed the perfect moment because he finally understood that waiting had been the prison of his past self. As the days passed, he realized that stopping those three destructive habits did more than free up time and energy. It changed the way he saw himself. It changed the way he walked into rooms, the way he approached challenges, the way he responded to setbacks. He was no longer the man who feared the future. He was becoming the man who created it. He noticed that the small tasks he once avoided were now things he completed without thinking. His mind no longer filled with excuses or resistance. What once felt difficult had become normal, even effortless. He felt lighter, not because his responsibilities disappeared, but because he finally stopped carrying the weight of avoidance. The mental fog that had followed him for years was fading. His focus sharpened, his thoughts cleared, his confidence deepened. He felt something he had not felt since childhood: possibility. Not vague hope, not vague plans, but real tangible possibility, the kind that makes you sit up straighter, breathe deeper, and look at your life with new eyes. He also noticed that the distance he created from draining people had opened space for something far more valuable: peace. With fewer voices pulling him backward, his own voice finally grew loud enough to hear. He began trusting his intuition again. He began believing in his ambitions without apologizing for them. He began making decisions based on who he wanted to become instead of who others expected him to be. It amazed him how much clarity returned the moment he stopped allowing negativity to occupy his mind. And in that clarity, he started dreaming again. Not childish fantasies, but real dreams, the kind that require courage to pursue, the kind that test your discipline, the kind that change your life. But the deepest change of all came from the shift in his mindset. For the first time in his life, he understood that action creates readiness, not the other way around. He stopped waiting for confidence because he discovered confidence was built in the moments he chose to act despite uncertainty. He stopped waiting for motivation because he discovered motivation is created through movement. He stopped waiting for the perfect timing because he discovered timing becomes perfect the moment you begin. Each small decision he made began to stack into momentum, and momentum began to stack into identity. He no longer had to force himself to be disciplined. He became someone who naturally honored his commitments. He no longer had to fight his old habits. They simply lost power because he no longer fed them with attention. One late night, he found himself sitting again in the quiet of his room, the same place where his transformation had started. But this time, the silence felt different. It felt warm instead of heavy, hopeful instead of painful. He looked around and realized that nothing in the room had changed physically, yet everything inside him had transformed. The walls were the same, the furniture was the same, the world outside was the same, but he was not the same. And with that realization came a wave of emotion he couldn't control. He had lived so many years believing he was broken or unlucky or stuck, never understanding that the real prison had been built by habits he never questioned. Now, with those chains gone, he could finally see how much life still waited for him. He imagined what the next 6 months could look like if he kept going. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but consistently. He imagined who he could become in a year, in 5 years. He imagined waking up in a life he once thought was impossible for someone like him. And for the first time in a long time, these images didn't feel like fantasies. They felt like a future he could walk toward, a future he could claim, a future he could build with his own hands. He felt something powerful rising inside him, something steady and undeniable. It was belief. Belief in his ability to grow. Belief in his ability to change. Belief that he was capable of far more than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. When he finally stood up from his bed, there was no dramatic music, no sudden enlightenment, no external sign that anything significant had occurred. But inside him, a quiet truth had settled. The truth that his life was now in motion. The truth that he had stepped onto a path very few people ever find. The truth that the moment he stopped doing the things that were destroying him was the moment his transformation truly began. And as he walked into the next day, the next week, the next chapter of his life, he carried with him a simple understanding that would shape everything he did from that moment on. You become a different person by choosing, and he had finally chosen himself. In the end, his transformation came down to 3 simple but life-changing decisions. He stopped delaying the small things because he finally understood that avoidance was the true thief of his confidence. He stopped giving his time and energy to people who kept him small because he realized that growth cannot survive in the wrong environment. And he stopped believing he needed the perfect moment to begin because he learned that action itself is what creates readiness. These 3 shifts were not dramatic, they were not loud, they were not complicated, but together they reshaped his entire life. And that is the message for you. Your future changes when you stop feeding the habits that quietly destroy you. Your confidence grows when you begin doing the things you once avoided. Your direction appears when you clear out the people and distractions that cloud your vision. Your life moves forward the moment you stop waiting for permission. If you want a different life in 6 months, stop doing the things that keep you tied to the one you are trying to leave behind. The moment you choose better, even quietly, even imperfectly, everything begins to shift in your favor. Your new life is ready whenever you are ready to stop doing the things that keep you from it.